Hello and welcome back, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my top watering tips to get the most out of your garden and save you money and water at the same time. Before we get started, I'd just like to make sure that you've gone down below, hit the subscribe button as well as the little bell icon to make sure you're notified next time I upload a video. So my first beginner watering tip is to water in the early morning or the late evening. And the reason for this is because it beats the peak of the sunlight and the heat at the middle of the day. And while most gardeners believe this is to prevent leaf burn from the water droplets burning off on the leaves, this is actually a myth. And the real reason is actually to prevent evaporation. So as you can see, I've got open soil here, well, it's actually a compost mulch. And on this soil, if there was a lot of water, it would be evaporating off. So like the sun's coming out now today, it would all be evaporating off, and that's the main reason. So it's not to prevent leaf burn, it's to prevent the evaporation of the water, which means it saves you water by watering in the early morning or the late evening. And another reason that you should water in early morning over the late evening, so I prefer to water in early morning. I used to prefer the evening, but now I prefer the early morning. And this is because if you water at the end of the day, it means the plants have to wait. So, if there's a hot day the next day, they have to be put under strain through that whole day till they get water in the evening. Whereas if you water in early morning, you give the plants enough water to be happy and comfortable all through the day. My next piece of advice is that consistency is key. And just like with a lot of things in your garden, little and often is the best approach. However, consistency comes over little and often in watering. Because if you water too often, if you say water daily like I used to, the plants will always get shallow roots and they won't be able to withstand things like the wind. Whereas if you leave it a bit longer between waterings, you'll be able to give them a deeper watering, and what this will do in turn is it'll train their roots deeper. So you put them under a bit of strain over a few days and you let them really stretch for water deeper down. And then you give them a good soaking every few days, or maybe once a week depending on what it is. However, if there's something that's fruiting or producing, for example, peas, or if there's things like salads and things that are shallow rooted, you may just need to water them a little bit more often. But the thing is consistency. So say you water every 4 days in hot weather or dry weather, then stick to that every 4 days, or every 2 days, stick to that. And especially with things like tomatoes, they really like consistency. So if you don't water consistently with tomatoes, you can get problems such as blossom end rot. Some of the plants that will need watering a lot more consistently are things like seedlings, salads, maybe if you've got a flowering plant that's flowering quite a lot at the moment, and also things like salad and fruiting crops, so maybe strawberries, maybe peas and beans, but they could probably stretch their roots a bit more. And as I said, things in greenhouses and polytunnels will need a consistent watering schedule, mainly because the rain doesn't fall on them. So if it does rain, the rain doesn't go on them because they've got a roof or a sheet over them. You can, however, water your tomatoes a bit less often, but still consistently. You can water them a little less often, and you can do a dry growing approach, which you can look into more after this video. But with tomatoes, they don't need to be wet all the time because they can easily be overwatered. But what they don't like is to be too dry and then really wet. So what they need to be is keep the soil a consistent moisture level. So don't let them get really wet and then really dry. They won't really like this, which is why I struggled to grow them outside last year in the UK, because sometimes we get really dry periods and then we get lots of rain, and we do get lots of rain. And that's the same with peppers. So with my peppers, I try and keep the soil a consistent temperature as well in the greenhouse, as well as the moisture level, because it means that they've always got the nutrients and the moisture they need available to them. And I also always feed my plants once a week as well. But with tomatoes and peppers, if you're going to feed them with a liquid feed, make sure that the soil is already moist, because then it won't shock the roots into panicking whenever they get loads of high concentrated feed in. They'll be able to easily absorb it. And now I'm going to talk to you about sources of water and their pros and cons of each. So for example, behind me I'm hiding a slimline water tank, and I'll be linking all of these water butts in the description, so if you want to buy a water butt for yourself to be able to store your water, then make sure you go down below. So with rainwater, the pros are that the plants are used to it. It's natural, it hasn't got any extra chemicals in it, it's just fallen from the sky into a tank, which is really good. And then, for example, the cons of it is that we get a lot of it, and if in the UK, if you want to store all of the rain you get, you'll need a lot of these tanks. And I've got this small one, but most of mine are quite big, and I've stored about 600 litres when they're full, and I still want more because when it's dry you do slightly get close to running out. But if you use some of the tips such as saving water when the taps are heating up and the showers are heating up from the boiler, saving that in a bucket and putting it into these tanks does save you a lot of water. And I know it has chlorine in it, but if your plants are in a drought and they're starting to get wilting quite a lot, then you will want this water. If growing flowers is where your interest is at, so such as here I've got my flower beds, if that's where you want to be putting your water and prioritising your water usage, then you can use grey water. So when you wash the dishes up, you can use that soapy water to water either a lawn, just like all this, or to water flower beds. You could use it to do vegetables. I wouldn't, unless you're using a sort of certified eco-friendly soap or any biodegradable soap. But if I'm going to use grey water, I would normally use it on my flower beds or the lawn. And something else that you can use is water from the grid, so water from the water system in your country. And this is a hose pipe I've got attached here. I avoid this at all costs, and I haven't really used it to water the garden properly for about 2 years, since 2018 when we had a drought, because I had to use it because we ran out of all the rest of our water. So if you're going to use it, try to use rainwater and grey water first, because it's much more, a better use for the water, because this is drinking water and we're taking that drinking water away where people could be drinking it. So what I would do is I'd try and use rainwater and grey water, and then if you run out of that, then you go to use the water from the grid, just like this. And if you're going to buy a hose, I'll probably link some hoses down in the description as well, but these hoses here are, well, they last quite a while if you look after them. This one doesn't leak at all, and we've had this for probably well over 10 years. So it's well worth an investment if you've got a tap. Rather than getting loads of watering cans and just doing loads of runs, it's lovely to get a hose where when you're using it, because I know when in the drought in 2018, when I was using a hose, I was very grateful for having a roll-out hose that I could reach the whole garden with, rather than having to cart loads of watering cans back and forth. So now I'm going to speak about how you can apply the water into your garden. So I just spoke about hoses, and there's also watering cans. And watering cans are the cheaper option, because hoses can be quite expensive, especially a good quality one. So that's why I'll be linking some more good watering cans down in the description. But these watering cans, I think I got this for a few quid, maybe £4, and it's really good. I probably prefer this to our other one, which is a bit more expensive, I think, but it's so old I can't remember. And yeah, what I recommend though is getting a rose as well, because if you look at this, that stream of water is quite strong, and that could wash out a lot of seeds or seedlings. So what you should do is use a rose like that, which spreads the water out and there's less pressure on one concentrated spot, and it means that you've got more, it's a bit more like rain basically, and I use that for everything basically. So for example, if I'm going to water this bed here, this heuchera that's been attacking me ever since I started filming this shot, I could be watering like this, so it imitates the rain basically. And I have got leaves in this watering can because I was trimming a bush the other day, so yeah, I've got a lot of branches and things in that. So that's how I would water a bed if it was dry, but I'm not going to water everything today because it has just finished raining a lot over the last week or two really. And you can get roses that have different sort of sprays on them. So this one's like a fan type spray, and that's a very, very fine one. You can get a bit more heavy duty than that. Another one that I've got has a brass or a copper end piece on it, and that one gets a lot more water out. It's a lot more efficient because this takes quite a while to give things a good soaking, whereas the other one really soaks things through, which is why that's my favourite for the rose. But for the watering can, this is probably my favourite. And I'll be linking roses down below as well. So my next section is to speak about all my tips about how to conserve water in a dry period or a drought. And some of the things I do, I'm going to be speaking about in this section obviously, but something that I do, which I'm going to talk about first, is prioritising watering. So for example, in my garden I prioritise food over like sort of vegetable patch watering over the flowers, and this is what I would recommend. But the thing is, some people prefer the flowers and some people only grow flowers. So prioritise the things that are more thirsty and aren't as drought tolerant, and then water the drought tolerant plants a lot less. So for example, I've got a butternut squash here and I'll be watering that in a dry period. If we were low on water, I'd water this more so than this and the other flower bed you just saw, to try and save water. I'd still water the flowers and things, but I'd water them maybe once or twice a week, whereas I'd be watering this a lot more often if it was very, very dry, that is. Something that you can do to conserve water in dry periods is mulch, whether this be a composted mulch, as is compost obviously, or something like hay, like a grass mulch. But I'll be making a video soon about all the uses of grass in the garden, so such as hay, grass clippings and things like that. So make sure you let me know in the comments if that's something you're excited for. And what mulches do is they stop the evaporation off the soil. So that's more important if you're using a rose more often. But if you're using just the spout to water around the base of the roots, then this won't be as helpful. But a mulch, I'll always recommend a mulch for everything in a garden, because it helps protect the soil and it also stops erosion. And a compost mulch, I'd recommend using a no-dig approach, where you just plonk it on top, just like what I've done with the grass here. And this is much better for the soil life. For a lot more long-term solution to save water in the long term, I'd highly recommend, as I will in any circumstance, you need more organic matter in your soil. If you think you've got enough, you need more. I've got all of that there, and that's old potting compost that I put on the flower beds. I don't really use my homemade compost, I try and prioritise my veg patch with that, but I put old potting compost on the flower beds as well as the veg patch. And what organic matter does, it's like a sponge, it's a very porous, so it sucks it all in, and this holds the water until the roots try and take it out of it, and then the roots will get it and the plants will be happy and healthy, just like all of my plants here. It also, organic matter also feeds the soil, so it feeds the plants and the soil. And I always say you're feeding the soil, and that's because the soil is what feeds the plants. So you feed the soil and the soil feeds the plants. And when you feed the soil, that means you're feeding all the bacteria, the fungi, and all of the worms and all the little insects that are growing and living in the soil, which is a great thing to do to support wildlife and the ecosystem within your garden. So I hope you learned something from this video about how to start watering your garden more efficiently and to get bigger harvests. So if you did enjoy, please like, comment and subscribe, as well as sharing with your friends to make sure you share the joy of gardening. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time.